Wonderful. Okay, so let me give a short introduction to one of my most enthusiastic and fun to work with colleagues, Jean-Baptiste Koehl. Is that a correct pronunciation of your surname?
Yeah, more or less. Good.
More or less, okay.
Yeah.
So Jean-Baptiste, his specialties are tectonics, structural geology, seismic interpretation, in particular applied to the North Atlantic and Arctic passive margins. He's had a long association with Norway. He obtained his PhD in Norway from the Arctic University of Norway in Tromsø. He's currently a researcher at the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences at McGill University in Canada and the Department of Geosciences at the University of Oslo in Norway. So this is a joint position. He's had a number of academic positions previously, but somewhat unusually for us academics, Jean-Baptiste also did a stint working as a geologist for a company called Favour Petroleum, working out of Stavanger, Norway. So Jean-Baptiste brings the unusual strengths of having a lot of expertise and experience interpreting seismic records with his academic expertise and his enthusiasm for academic pursuits. So this puts him in quite a strong position because he has a skill set which is quite rare. And he also has contacts and networks within the industry, so he can get data and information often not available to academics. So Jean-Baptiste and I are working together on this. I suggested a theory for Iceland, and he had the innovative idea of seeing if this could be extended to other places in the world. Because obviously, if you come up with a theory and there's only one example, then that's kind of a little bit of a dead end. So today he's going to tell us about this theory, and I'll now hand over to you, Jean-Baptiste.
Thanks a lot. And yeah, I'm going to share this new exciting theory with you because it's way too much for one person. Sometimes I just have nightmares about it. I just want to share it, get this off my chest, you know. But not only today, we are also going to try to solve a 100-year-old conflict we're going to do in psychology. I'm going to take you through the roller coaster of the grief cycle, which is what all of us have to go through several times, many times in our lives, if we want to move on from trouble and grief. And that goes through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance phases, basically. And tonight, flat out, my goal is to get you all depressed, at the very least, So you might want to hold on tight to your drink because you might need it more than you think. But enough for the psychological part. First, we're going to have a brief introduction to these once competing theories, but which we are going to try to reconcile. And we're going to approach some very basic concepts about plate tectonics and some controversies. What doesn't work? Because that's the interesting part. And then we're going to see how the new theory can make this work and what the implications are for plate tectonics in general. So you're, without doubt, familiar with Alfred Wegener's continental drift theory, right? Mobile continents, continents were once secreted into a large landmass called Pangea, and were then rifted apart into their current configuration. Now, how do you think people felt at the time when he first proposed this theory? Denial. Get out of here. Mobile continent? What else? I mean, not possible. And come back another time. And some of these people had a different idea, which they call land bridge theory. And they actually explained similar fossil records on separate continents by land bridges, which are, where they explain were now sunken. And there were several of them, one Iceland, another between Africa and Brazil, some southern hemisphere. And there were quite prominent scientists at the time, Hermann von Hering, German, and Charles Kuchert, and John Gregory, for example, name a few. I mean, what I suspected that these people, quite angry at Wegener, that really, no, get out, that's not possible. Marble continents, what else? These people believed in continent fixity. The continents were immobile, had never moved, and will never move. But as time moved on, and some other scientists came up with new studies, such as Alexander Dutoit, South African field geologist, mapping belt rocks and deformation structures in South Africa, and then in Brazil, we realized that they were quite similar on both sides of the Southern Atlantic, and they just had found one piece of the puzzle supporting Wegener's theory. So at that stage, I think people were starting to bargain. It's like, come on, no, this is not happening. No, 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 no. How could this be? And then the problem was that at Wegener's time in Dutoit's time, there was no driver for plate tectonics or for continental drift until Arthur Holmes came up with mantle convection, so large fluxes of partially molten material coming from the core mantle boundary and all the way to Earth's surface, and kind of forcing the continents apart in some places, and in others continents colliding with some material being recycled into the mantle. And at that stage, I think that some of those opponents to continental drift felt quite depressed. Life became meaningless for them, or began to feel meaningless for them. But it's only later, much later, when Frederick Vine and Drummond Matthews came with these the interpretation of these global study of magnetism of the seafloor that suggests that basically magma is extruded along the mid-ocean region and freeze the magnetic field, the present magnetic field, and then those rocks are then shoved aside and replaced by new ones that freeze the new magnetic field, which reverses over time. So we have this alternating pattern of polarity of the seafloor in the rocks, and that's when continental drift and modern plate tectonics became accepted. But something very important happened in the meantime. The hero of the story, Alfred Wegener, had died in Greenland. And now that can seem trivial to the pursuit of science, but it might not have been, because now every time I try to approach a colleague and try to suggest that Wegener's theory was not 100% perfect, get out of here, no ill speaking about the dead. How dare you desecrate Wegener? So I feel like our society, or some people in our community, are kind of stuck in this survival skill complex. We had denied Wegener's idea for quite some time, and then to find out at the end that he was eventually right years after his death, kind of potentially had made some people feel guilty. And I don't know if some of you have seen that series, Sherlock, about Sherlock Holmes, one of my heroes. And at some point in the series, Sherlock Holmes commits suicide. Now, this gentleman here, policeman Philip Henderson, has always been mean to Sherlock, because Sherlock always makes him feel small and insignificant by his cutting-edge methods. So he always bullied him, this policeman. And when Sherlock kills himself, he feels guilty. He's like, oh, no, now I believe in Sherlock Holmes. He's not dead. He can't be dead. No, oh, he was so wonderful. Now, that's survival guilt complex. And unfortunately, in our society, it might have led to a black and white thinking complex, which suggests that we either lean 100% towards one way or 100% towards the other. And that means that we threw away absolutely everything that was not continental drift, including land bridge theory, to the trash. There's nothing good in there. Continent fixity, land ridges, out of here. And that's a shame, because I think that although I reject continent fixity, I do not agree with that too. I still think there might have been some features of interest in land bridge theory. But we'll come back to that. First, we're going to go through a few basic concepts of continental drift in modern plate tectonics as we currently understand it. So we have a thick and light continental crust that is and very thin and dense oceanic crust. Now, thin, dense oceanic crust, when plates are colliding or going against one another, the oceanic crust being denser, it goes under and is recycled into the mantle. And when two continental crusts meet, then none of them is going under. They just thicken the crust, and we have a much thicker crust, about 70, 80 instead of 30, 40 kilometers thick. Now, oceanic crust can be quite thin. It's about 10 kilometers. Give a couple of kilometers max. Now, this principle, with which we balance a thin and dense oceanic crust with a thick and poorly dense continental crust, is called isostasy, right? At some point, all the excess weight generated by a positive topography above sea level is compensated with a weight deficit at depth. So less dense rocks at depth. Instead of mantle rocks, we have continental crust that are extending much deeper into the Earth's interior. Now, we remember ocean crust 10 kilometers approximately. And now we have come to the point of controversies. One of the key areas for plate tectonics and continental drift is Iceland, where we can see supposedly seafloor spreading and a lot of volcanic rocks coming up at the surface, being extruded there, and the plates moving from one another. Now, the problem with Iceland is that it is much, much, much thicker than 10 kilometers. It's between 25 to 40 kilometers. That's much closer to regular thickness continental crust. Although we know that there are purely mafic oceanic type rocks at the surface, they still seem very, very strange. Now, many people have argued that this is related to a mantle plume, so a huge flux of magma or partially molten material rising from the core mantle boundary and really feeding lots of magma under Iceland and generating a really thick oceanic crust there. But one of the main problems with this would be, I don't deny plume, I don't mind them, they don't bother me at all. But wouldn't that be difficult to accommodate with isostasy? Like, just one example, I was wondering the other day, like 10,000 years ago, we had the last glacial maximum with an ice cap over whole Europe. And that triggered an almost immediate response. The crust went down. There's extra weight here, everything gets pushed down. And now, less than 10,000 years ago, that started to melt. And we still feel the effects. Everything's coming back up. Everything's moving, but Iceland is not. I mean, this really, really thick oceanic crust, 40 kilometers of really dense material, is still staying on itself. It's not collapsing completely. What the hell's going on there? It's very strange that this should stay as it is. And then it hit me. I came across Gillian's paper, and one of Gillian's paper, and it's like, yeah, continental crust under Iceland. Hey, why not? Interesting. And now I want you all in denial. Get out of here. Continental crust under Iceland. This is not possible. Are you all there? Great. Excellent. Very good. Now we're going to take a step back, and I want to take you to the Norwegian Arctic, where it all started with me, and with something absolutely not related to continental versus oceanic crust. It was not about that. So we're going to have a look at a seismic section in there. So the seismic sections are a bit like the X-ray of the Earth. You just send seismic waves in Earth with explosions, and you stack them up with the time they come back to your receivers, and then you can make up layers of rocks and deformation structures. And this is what we saw in this very deep seismic section, quite old as well, from the 80s, 90s, but wonderful, a lot of information and open access up for the grab to anyone from the Norwegian Offshore Directorate. And what we see here is there's a huge triangle here with very bright reflections, planar reflections, that looks a bit like that, like sheets of rocks, huge packages that were thrust onto one another. And one key to this interpretation are all the other small, tiny reflections there, small wiggly reflections. So that's with the interpretation, but we're going to zoom in there, and I'm going to show you those wiggly reflections. These are meaningful, and these hold geological information. These are asymmetric faults along major thrusts. They indicate the direction of transports. They are asymmetric. They lean towards the right side, which suggests that the transport is towards the right. And all these major fault surfaces are large cracks and shear surfaces in the Earth's crust. Right. And to give you an example of the scale of this structure, I mean, what scale what structures onshore can we compare them to? If we take those two here, they're about 1 kilometer wide, and that is about the size of Mount Kidd and the Lewis Thrust in the Canadian Rockies. So that's a very special place for many structural geologists, where a lot of my peers, where a lot of structural terms were defined. Now, to most structural geologists, Mount Kidd and the Lewis Thrust would be considered a major structures, but in my world, they are teeny tiny little things, little bits of huge, gigantic structures that are thousands of kilometers long, tens of kilometers thick. So they're very small. These structures we can see onshore. And now I want you all very angry. How dare you desecrate Mount Kidd? Oh, this is an outrage. Are you there? No? You'll get there. No worries. All right. So now that was my journey through the Arctic. I was able to map major thrust system, thousands of kilometers long, tens of kilometers thick, on seismic data. And then I tried to apply it to other margin, and I said, hey, what about the Green License Faroe Ridge that everyone is just talking about? Can we see anything there? There's not a whole lot of seismic data there, but I was lucky enough to find some of the Faroes from the industry, reprocessed, really beautiful data. And this is the transect I'm going to show you now, right at the transition between the presumed transition between continent and oceanic crust. Now, one of the main issues around the Faroes is that we know from exploration wells and from field geology on the Faroes that there is a very thick succession of volcanics, and volcanics are very dense, and they until now they were masking everything that was below. And we also didn't have well control. We didn't know what was below. So these major, very thick, several kilometers thick volcanics, and here this kind of delta-like pile of volcanics, these seawards dipping reflectors, they're called, and some intrusions here, some volcanic intrusions, so magnetic intrusions, sorry, these SDRs, seawards dipping reflectors, they are generally interpreted as the boundary from very thick continental crust to thin oceanic crust. But thanks to these new reprocessed data, we can make out a lot more below. There is a wealth of information hidden below there. All those structures here that we can see, they continue below the seawards dipping reflector. We see major thrusts now that belong, in this case, most likely to the Laxfordian origin, that we find evidence of in Koehl, in northern Scotland, and now around the Faroes. So major structures, tens of kilometers wide and hundreds of kilometers long for the moment. And what we can see is that we can trace them all the way below the seawards dipping reflector and beyond. So these structures are 1.8 billion years old. Very, very old. They're way older than the presumed oceanic crust at the Greenland Iceland Faroe Ridge. I mean, I'm not denying that there is oceanic crust here, that there is certainly oceanic crust and Cenozoic. So let's say 60 million years. That's nothing compared to these 1.8 billion years. So these structures continue all the way to Iceland. There are ongoing mapping here that suggests that they continue all the way to Iceland itself. Well, then the crust in this Greenland Iceland Faroe Ridge is continental in nature. So although we have this thick layer of volcanics and lavas in the upper crust, the lower part of the crust must be continental if we find these structures all around. There are some evidence also from seismic on the other side from Greenland, although with lower quality, unfortunately. And now I want you all in bargaining. No, 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 this is not happening. No, no, this can't be. No, 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 please. Are you there? Yes, getting there? Maybe not. Oh, I hope I haven't you stuck in denial. God. Anyways. Right. So good evidence for a continental lower crust under Iceland, but I don't deny that there is the continents are moving and moving away from one another, and that there is oceanic crust being produced south and north of Iceland. Wait a minute, but then how does that work with having continental crust here? Well, I didn't say that continental crust was static. It's moving, contracting, and extending together with those adjacent oceanic domains. And it hit me the other day when I was preparing lunch. I was baking pizza and I was working on the dough, and I just suddenly realized, hey, isn't the Earth crust a giant pizza dough? Let me demonstrate. We have two segments of the crust that are thickened like orogens, like very, very, very thick, 70, 80 kilometers, and a segment in the middle that is regular sized thickness of continental crust. Now the rift is opening perpendicular to these segments, and what we're going to see, ta-da, is that the thin segment is going to rupture first and allow opening of oceanic crust right there, while the other two segments of thickened orogenic crust take more time to rupture, although they are extending and they are moving. They're not static like land bridges. They are still extending, but they take much more time. And once enough extension has occurred, they eventually rupture. But they don't rupture necessarily along the same axis as the central segment or as the adjacent rifts. Right. So if we take it step by step. So again, two segments with thickened crust, twice thicker crust, and a central segment with regular thickness continental crust. We open perpendicular to those segments, right? That's the direction of extension. And we form first oceanic crust right there at the central segment of moderate thickness, right? And then, very good analog, Iceland and Fram Strait, right? And then eventually we rupture those bridges, or should I call them, since they are located along orogenic bridges. And along those, parallel to those ridges, we have major steps in the rift axis, like here and here. And those are the locus of major transform faults, as it turns out. And now we have two plates, right? And now we have through-going oceanic domain. Now, in Iceland, since the crust is at least 25 kilometers all the way through the ridge, I don't believe that there is any oceanic crust that this orogenic bridge is ruptured yet, but it would in the near future if there is more, if more extensions is to occur and to continue. Right, now there's something very similar in the Fram Strait, except in the Fram Strait we already see that there is a major reorientation of the rift here, and two features of interest. This part of the rift and the Arctic rift, so this Mons Ridge, they opened more or less at the same time in the Cretaceous, while the Front Strait opened in the Oligocene, much later, much later. And it's quite oblique. But one thing that there is in the Barents Sea, we can very easily see on seismic data throughout, is these red lines. There are major thrust systems from the Timman and Orogeny, which you can see onshore Russia and northern Norway. Now, these structures are oblique to the rift, in some cases nearly perpendicular to it in these small ridges here. And so when the rift arrives at an area with thickened crust and with structures that are oblique or suborthogonal to the rift, well, these structures are just simply not suitably oriented and to efficiently thin the crust. Therefore, they force the rift to jump and then to try to bite its way gradually, but with taking much more time through this slice of orogenic crust. And this is why Svalbard and Greenland stayed connected much longer than Norway and Greenland. In Norway and Greenland, we had the Caledonian orogeny parallel to the rift. Yeah, the structures were already oriented suitably to thin the crust, while here they weren't. The same in Iceland and in the Davis Strait, Labrador Sea, hit a wall here, the Tongat orogeny, Paleoproterozoic, just like in Iceland, perpendicular, just couldn't do it, stepped into Baffin Bay and eventually aborted. There is through-going continental crust there. This is Davis Strait high, which we know is continental and goes from one margin to the other. There is through-going continental crust there still. So this orogenic bridge really prevented rifting from proceeding. Right. So a giant pizza dough. Now, if we move to the southern Atlantic, because they are mostly continuous, except in the Front Strait, where we might have a through-going oceanic domain. That's debatable for some cases, but that's a debate we can have another time. But in southern Atlantic, we also see that we have some potential origins that go far at sea, like, for example, Rio Grande Ridge, where we have some continental material that was recovered, like Morris Island Bank also drilled continental granulites. We see that the rift right at those ridges is reorienting and then proceeding on north-south fashion again, and then major step again right across these origins here. This is the Cape Fold Belt, Permian Triassic, and this is the Kunga origin, late Neoproterozoic Cambrian. Now, in this case, there is a through-going mid-ocean ridge, so we would be in the case where the rift, those orogenic bridges are ruptured, but then we see the steps and reorientation of the rift anyway along these, across these, or the location of these orogenic bridges. So the rift steps, and that's where we have those major transform faults. Now, I should have you all depressed if I've done my job correctly. Is that right?
Oh,
are you all there? This is time for a drink.
I'm sure we're in it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay. So we have seen that we have two types of orogenic bridges, the continuous ones that are still extending together with the adjacent oceanic domains, and the ones that are ruptured and that seem to localize the formation of major transform faults. So if I take a look at the global map, and we see that there's a lot of these potential orogenic bridges, like in Eastern Africa and Antarctica, this East African Antarctica origin and the Andrew Bain fracture zone. There are a lot of those areas in dashed yellow that are areas with anomalously thick crust, so much thicker than typical oceanic crust. And these were so far every time, or nearly every time, could be related to or were ascribed to a potential mantle plume. Now we are starting, thanks to the industry that is kindly sharing seismic data, we start seeing structures through these continental structures extending into these ridges below the caps of volcanics. But they are not only the only lines of evidence. For example, Mauritius There's been a study of xenocrysts from volcanics in this area that show that some minerals that were ripped from the crust at depth were much older than what was anticipated. They were suggesting that there is continental crust under these areas. And again, Rio Grande Ridge, where we had the dredging, recovering continental material, and some seismic data from the Russians in Antarctica with potential continental affinities. Well, now this is just a theory, but I want to draw your attention to the fact that every single major transform faults, those red lines that seem to across which the rift, the mid-ocean ridge seems to jump, they all correlate with an origin on the adjacent margin that is orthogonal or highly oblique to the active mid-ocean ridge. So, for example, the Delamerian orogeny and the Ross orogeny in Australia and Antarctica, with the Tasman fault zone, all the other Bellamy or transform faults in there, and quite a few other Caledonian, Appalachian, and Charlie Gibbs. Lots of examples. So there's really a lot to do to test this theory. This is still a theory, but it's very exciting, I must say. And I want to draw your attention to one more thing. Back to the land bridge theory. We see that every single land bridge that was postulated coincides with a potential orogenic bridge in Iceland, Western Africa, Brazil, Antarctica, South America, and the Tasmania or Eastern Australia, Antarctica. So there is something to it. And I'm not saying that the continent fixity is right, not at all. We're not going back there. I do not support that. And none of my colleagues support fixism. But the idea of having some sort of connection, and still in some cases, like in Iceland, Front Strait and Davis Strait, still continued some type of connection, although it's not over the sea or emerged. It was very interesting and very astute by these old geoscientists. So we've seen that continental drift really paved the way to modern plate tectonics, but cannot explain everything. It's nice not to forget that the other theories, although they were competing with one another, they can still be reconciled and take bits from one and from the other, and really better our understanding of modern plate tectonics with some updates. Hopefully, we can work this out. And we've seen that there is a very interesting case to be made for a large portion of the offshore crust being continental rather than oceanic, which does not prevent the plates from moving away from one another. It does not prevent rifting. The crust in Iceland, in the Greenland Iceland Faroe Ridge, if it's continental at depth, it is still extending together with the oceanic domains on either sides. I mean, we have a very good case here. There's Jan Mayen that we know is continental as well. So in this case, there is a small anticline here from the Iceland that was just, the crust there was the orogenic bridge ruptured much earlier in this domain here than here. It's just much thicker here than here. So it was possible to open these oceanic domain much earlier. So we're going to try to test this theory worldwide with Gillian and a few colleagues, trying to use machine learning, geophysical mapping, geochronology, structural field mapping, and a few other rock physical property, and try to come up with more precision on what is the truth, and how we can make this theory work. So thanks a lot for listening to me, and I'm happy to take any question now or by email if that's better for you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
So, John, will you take it from here, or shall I?
Well, I think, Gillian, if you wouldn't mind, because I think I mean, this is such a technical area. For if you want to field questions, and if people, but just to say, people want to field questions, if they want to unmute themselves, or else put them on the chat. And if you want to pick those up, Jill.
Okay, fine. So first of all, thank you very much indeed, Jean-Baptiste, for taking this time out of your extremely busy schedule to lecture to the group. It's enormously appreciated. Would somebody like to field the first question? While you're thinking of your questions, I'd just say that I think your arguments are extremely persuasive. I mean, I can share with the audience that it's essentially undisputed that there was a land bridge between Greenland and the Faroes, Scandinavia, up until about 10, 15 million years ago. So this land bridge was about 1,000 kilometers long, and it's known that it was there from not only biological comparisons of flora and fauna on both sides of the Atlantic, but you know, also from the circulation of ocean waters from the region north of Iceland to the region south of Iceland. So it was known that there was a 1,000-kilometer long land bridge, and this essentially is not disputed. This information really kind of got buried, really, because as Jean-Baptiste has described, the land bridge theory just got completely debunked when it was found that Wegener was right, and people thought these old guys were completely just crazy. But you know, so people sort of forgot about what was called the Thulian land bridge. But the other ones are more speculative, and it'll be very exciting to see where Jean-Baptiste's research goes in the future, whether he can actually nail it down and get people to admit that there were more than just this one through Iceland.
Well, I think that one of the main issue is going to convince people of the reliability of seismic interpretation, which I think a lot of field geologists, especially in my home institute, are very, very they don't like that approach at all. They do not feel like they can see those structures, so they just they full denial.
So one issue I think is that this new theory is actually threatening the plume hypothesis, because in particular, I'm looking at your panel 3 there on the screen. At Iceland, if we can essentially prove that there's continental crust under there, all the necessity for a plume disappears, because, you know, the plume hypothesis is used to try to explain the thick crust, for example. So if the thick crust is continental, there's absolutely no necessity for a plume whatsoever. And the same goes for...
Could the plume explain the high amount of volcanism? Maybe I don't know. As I say, I really don't mind plumes. They don't bother me at all, and they don't bother orogenic bridge theory. As you say, they will, if it's not true, they will collapse on their own sooner or later. So
yes, probably. But yeah. You know, if a large part of the thick crust at Iceland is continental, there is no excess volcanism.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the same as it is out in the ocean. And another location there, the green one, the South Atlantic, the Rio Grande Rise and the Walvis Ridge. You know, that's another place where a plume has been suggested to explain those very features which you're claiming are continental.
And Madagascar and Mozambique Ridge as well. Now I'm quite confident in Walvis Ridge. I don't have access to the data there, but I've seen some papers publishing the data. The seismic reflection data. You see thrust systems below the volcanics. It's like, but I mean, as I said, you saw how difficult it can be to interpret such structures when you're just looking at things like that. Okay, this is one of the very beautiful example, but looking at those wiggly reflections, it's not like you need to train the eye to see these. I mean, you need to also have the luck to find the seismic transect suitably oriented. That means not oblique to the structures, but perpendicular and or parallel to the structure. Otherwise, they don't look as beautiful as that. So it can be quite challenging, and for people that are not familiar with that technique. And this is brand new. I mean, this was the first example was published 2 years ago. But more people are starting to see them, and that's very nice. The industry is showing a lot of interest in this work, and they're generously offering 3D data. And unfortunately, it's mostly around Norway and the Northern Hemisphere, where I would say we have an incomparable database in Norway. It's really fantastic what the industry has done there.
Can I
I
ask
mean,
you,
there's oil,
Baptiste?
so it's yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, can I just, John Baptiste, what if you had Elon Musk's budget? What would you do? Would you acquire some more high-resolution seismic, or tune to whatever you needed to do, or do you want drilling, or what would be your dream?
No. Drilling is way too expensive. Having done a stint in the oil industry, I know how expensive this is. This is just not. I mean, not what we plan to do. I was hoping to get into the IODP thing, but they can't drill deep anymore. So also I've been told. So that's that plan must be postponed. Then acquiring seismic is also very, very expensive now. The existing database of TGS, which has merged with PGS now, and I'm in contact with both hands. That's really, really funny how everything turned out. But it's sufficient. I can't say that I will be able to test the theory at every single orogenic bridge, but off the coast of New Guinea and Brazil, there are super deep seismic from Ion, for example, that are really wonderful. That can really be used for our purpose. And then, of course, what would be really nice would be to do what we've done, what we have had the luck to do in Svalbard, which is to tie transform faulting to the major thrust systems and see how the thrust systems are controlled, the thinning of the crust and transform faulting in there. So that's also part of it. Plus,
have you got any
sorry.
access, Jean-Baptiste, to nodal data? Because if you had seismic nodes, you can get really low frequencies transmitted, which would help you a lot.
Yeah. So yeah, we have some, as I said, some very deep seismic data with very low frequency that really, really is helpful. Yes. And luckily, also I have some friends that could help, that have agreed to help reprocess some data, especially around Iceland, where the data are not that this many, and they're old and in some cases very noisy. So it would be nice also to denoise and remove some multiples are easy to see through, but there are other artifacts that could be great to get rid of before we can actually publish the data.
It's slightly sad, Jean-Baptiste, to hear you say that drilling and these seismics are far too expensive, whereas I understand Elon Musk is going to try to send space missions to Mars. We seem to be more interested in other planets than our own.
Well, the thing is that there are common interests, and I agree that would be kind of wasted money if we academics had to apply for such a large amount of money from public money to fund such kind of acquisition. The industry is acquiring really state-of-the-art data, which are really truly wonderful, and that can be not, of course, that follows the oil and gas areas, the oil and gas. How do you call that? A lead, or so you need to. If there is no oil or gas in the area you want to test, then well, you're in there for the long haul, because that's going to be very difficult. But yeah, at least in all these areas, Gulf of Guinea and Brazil, Falklands, South Africa, there is enough data of really good enough quality. Most of them published by academics, but they didn't know what those major thrust structures looked like on seismic. It's really recent, and the industry people, they were not initially interested in them, so they were not really looking at them until recently. They realized that, hey, in Norway, the largest two discoveries were above reactivated thrust systems, which fractured carbonates or even basements, and they found huge, gigantic field of oil there. So that suddenly they became relevant for industry too. Just
to push back on your apologizing for them, I wasn't aware there was any oil or gas on Mars either.
No, yeah,
But let's set that aside and take some questions from the audience that have been posted in the chat box.
Yes, please.
User asks, is there any evidence of these bridges back in the geological record?
If there are any evidence of these bridges put back in the geological record, what? Okay, I got it now. I just found a paper recently, 2024, paleontologists publishing about footprints of dinosaurs in Brazil and was that Togo or one of those countries in Guinea, and they also argue that the bridge connection there was much younger than what people claim it to be according to continental drift. So there are some other lines of evidence that can be used, and that people are. I mean, there are also some, and now I cannot remember the papers in particular, but there are some evidence in this area of the East African Antarctica origin about the spreading of fauna and flora on the ocean, in the ocean, that was kind of hampered at some barriers. And one of them coincides here in time and shape with this major orogenic bridge here that took some time to collapse and to stretch before it allowed actually the species to exchange fully, the two domains to exchange fully species across. So there are other lines of evidence from science, sub-sciences, which I am not a specialist at all. And this is really encouraging to see that we can all collaborate towards a common goal. There is hope, and there is still a lot of things to research and that are really exciting. So it's really exciting times for us, I think, for the geosciences.
Okay, David Carmichael has asked, I think you said some rocks were dated around 1.5 billion years old. How was that determined?
Oh, there was some exploration wells, 1.8. This is the Laxford origin in northern Scotland. So that's the edge of deformation, not of the rocks. And some exploration wells drilling for oil and gas on Koehl. And in the Ammassalik belt on the other side in Greenland, and the Naxik-Tokenian equivalent in Western Greenland. These have all been dated. Very well-known deformation event that happened in many places around the world, like in southern Scandinavia as well, and northern Scandinavia. So it's very interesting how these origin will be able to we're going to be able to fit them together and reconstruct past plate tectonics with a lot more anchor points than we are doing right now. I mean, especially if you now just think about it for 1 second and assume that our interpretation is correct, and that there is a through going 1.8 billion year old origin going from Scotland to Greenland. What does it tell you about Baptiste and all the oceans that were presumed to have opened between those two continents? There are a lot of really interesting implications to that. That doesn't mean they did not open, but that means that the two continents cannot have moved. One had rotated like this and the other way. No, they stayed connected somehow. So that's going to really facilitate plate tectonic reconstruction, really for a long time back in time. So
this actually brings us nicely into a question posed in the chat box by Julie, who is interested in high school level education. So she asks, who in the scientific community needs to be convinced of the validity of this theory? And could you see the model working its way into the rewriting of teaching notes of plate tectonics at high school level, for example? To Julie's question, I would think that this is a fairly major revision of our view of the geological makeup of the oceans, and I would think that yes, it could change what's taught at high school level. But what is your opinion on that, Jean-Baptiste?
So I was going to bounce back on that because I'm very happy that the European Union has invited me to Science is Wonderful in Brussels to expose that model to high school students and to secondary school students. So that this is excellent. I submitted the proposal of this pizza dough model. We're going to bake pizza with a lot of kids and show them how plate tectonics evolved with a giant puzzle through going oceanic, and now we are baking pizza, showing that actually it's a bit more complicated than that. So yes, it's going to happen, and it is really exciting, and so it will go through somehow. It seems like a lot of people are showing enthusiasm, and it's very nice. But yeah, it will take time. I know that we cannot just like push a theory like that. We need to be very thorough in our approach, but I have all confidence that we will manage to do a great job and involve more students, hopefully with a large grant, and focus the work on those very specific places where we need to demonstrate proof of concept for this theory.
Thank you. Can we have more questions from the audience? So we still have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Just ask away, everybody.
Could I just come in? An interesting issue, because in our lecture actually in October, we were similarly taken through the history of the controversy over the Moyne thrust. So it's a very interesting way of structuring the lecture. But what I'm interested to ask was that a couple of years ago we had a fascinating lecture on plate tectonics at 50 from a geologist, I think from Wales, and he talked about some of the sort of his concerns about some, shortcomings of our understanding of the theory. And I seem to recollect that he talked about the use of one of his illustrations was differing sort of strengths of gravity around continents. And I wondered, just to kid me, presumably I don't know how they measure gravity, but is that something that's also a useful way of getting at some of this information?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so what I usually do is that when I said we're going to test theory with geophysical mapping, so seismic interpretation is really a very good way because it shows you specific structures, but you can also add to that magnetic data, gravimetric data that also image these structures in a very specific way each. So when you mix them all and they all converge towards the same story, it's really, really wonderful. I mean, we have an example in the Barents Sea where you can trace this origin that is, let me come back to that. And I might, let's see, yes, that origin here, all those faults, you can see them, trace them on seismic data, but also on magnetic and gravimetric data. And this is our 2022 paper. Perhaps I could, if you indulge me, I could try to find it for you. It's very interesting, but it's open access. So in the worst case, it must be there. Too much data. Let's see.
Thank you very much.
Right there. Right. I think it's 5. Yes, right there. So gravimetry here.
And we can only see your pizza dough picture.
Oh, my bad. Oh, sorry.
You have to quit and then reshare.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I shared. Let's share the screen then. Yeah, right. How about now?
Yes, that's good.
So not only were we able to trace those faults on seismic data, so very specifically point at specific places where the deformation structure happened, but most of them are correlated with major gravimetric highs because they bring dense rock up and bring.
So the colors of gravity, red is high gravity, and
yeah. So that's when you have some of these, and actually, since they were reworked, we had this Timanian orogeny that was contraction from north to south, which resulted in those very these east-west faults. But then came the Caledonian orogeny, east-west contraction. So they were kind of folded, these pre-existing structures. So you can see them doing some very funny geometries, both in map view and on seismic data. It is wonderful how the entire array of geophysic data just shows the structure of the margin. There are some areas that are more complicated, of course, but there are some really good information to be extracted from each of these data sets. Now, I mean,
Thank you very
Just
much.
make-
That's fascinating stuff.
No problem. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so if we can stop sharing there. Okay, if there are no further questions, oh, okay. There's one more. There are one more questions embedded in the multiple thank you messages. Jean-Baptiste, Paul Armitage comments. This has my support. Where application of the theory is concerned, I've worked in Malawi for many years, and I'm particularly interested in the relationship between carbonatites and the crustal shear zones. Extension, of course, has not progressed so far that we see a thick pile of young volcanics all over the country, but what I've given some thought to is where there might be transforms and why. By the way, I might have made Professor Stefan Berg in Tromsø reach a state of denial and anger, at least with some of my observations. So there's a lot of wicked people out there trying to.
No. I think this is a joke by Paul. I mean, I don't know what his relation is with the Paul. Yeah, Stefan is a very open-minded Norwegian geologist. Even though he has very strong opinion, he will always agree to disagree. He would not go threaten to fire you. He's a very, very nice person, I must say. I recognize your name. Yes, Paul. I think we met once when I was a master's degree.
We did.
That was some time ago.
I was visiting. Yeah, it was some time after I'd studied there.
Right.
I was visiting to do some field work. That's right. Good to see you.
Yeah, great to see. Yeah, very nice. Thank you for your comment.
Okay, given the late stage of the time, I think it just remains to me to thank you very, very much indeed, Jean-Baptiste, for that.
My pleasure. Thanks to you.
Really
for having me.
energetic and fun talk, and I'm quite certain that you presented it in a way which will result in none of the audience ever forgetting it, which is saying a lot for any talk, to be quite frank.
Yeah.
So everybody, please join me in giving Jean-Baptiste a clap there.
Thanks a lot. Thank
you. I wish everybody a good evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Julian.
Thank you, Julian.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Baptiste.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.